So I think the part of mental illness that's often overlooked, which places almost more than the illness itself the most stress on the person. And by stress, I don't mean like, oh, I have an appointment tomorrow, I'm feeling stressed. I mean stressed like the stress that's put on the rivets holding up a building, like the stress that's put on the frame of a building holding it up. Something that's fundamentally pushing against the foundations, if you get what I mean. So I think what is the biggest stressor other than the illness itself is the dysregulation between your conscious and subconscious. And I've talked a bit about this in the past, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. Basically, what happens when you suffer from severe depression or anxiety is your conscious, rational mind is saying something, and your emotional, instinctual mind is saying something completely different. And it's not just where like a normal case of this, like where there's a piece of chocolate cake and you're like, oh, I want to eat that cake, and your rational mind's like, no, you shouldn't eat it. You've already eaten too much. You're gonna gain weight, and that's bad. I don't mean it necessarily like that. I mean your rational mind might be saying, oh, killing this person would be wrong, but your emotional mind is just completely different. Like, oh, we have to kill, we have to destroy, etc. And this gets down to fundamental aspects of worldview. It's perfectly possible to be a rational atheist but fanatically religious in terms of emotions, or a committed like 100% theist who's kind of completely atheistic in their practices of the religion and the way they kind of respond to it. It's kind of difficult to explain, but basically within you you'll have this fundamental separation between your mind and emotions, and it creates a sense of continual alienation. And yeah, like I said, I've talked about this in the past, but it creates this sense of alienation and this sense of stress, and it breaks down your identity because you go, do I identify with these extremely powerful emotions, or do I identify with my consciousness and what it's saying? And it's one of the kind of it's something very difficult, and Dennis Prager talks a lot about this, is to do good and to be moral you often have to fight your feelings, and to a certain extent that's part of what being an adult is learning to, I guess you could say, veto bad feelings using your reason and your morality. And that is fine, because obviously not they're not going to be in line, like I said with the chocolate cake example, 100% of the time. But if they're completely disaligned 100% of the time, that is not a very good state to be in. You lose the ability to really identify which one is which. And the stress from that, once again, I mean stress like, trying to think of an example, like, when you're on a ski lift, and the ski lift is, there's the big cable that the ski chairs are attached to, I guess they're called, and all that, like, tons and tons of metal is pulling it down with the people on it. That's what I mean by stress. So it's fundamentally, it's an equation that can't be balanced. It's a checkbook that, sorry, an equation that can't be solved, a checkbook that can't be balanced. And this inherent contradiction devastates people, and it makes it worse because there's a vicious cycle present in depression, and this is one of the reasons why I'm favorable towards medication. Is depression makes you have a very low opinion of yourself. I mean, that's part of it. And the issue is, if you have a low opinion of yourself and you're just feeling lethargic and you want to blow your brains out, you're not going to be very productive or successful, really. Regardless of your definition of success, you're not going to be very good at it if you're like catatonically depressed. So, what happens is you get like catatonically depressed, you start failing at doing everything, and then you go, oh, look, this means I'm a terrible person because I fail at everything, and then that makes you more depressed, and then you fail more, and it's kind of this vicious cycle you get into. So what I'm trying to say is you have these vicious emotional cycles, and you have this fundamental disconnect, and I think this is what really wears people down and makes them kill themselves. So let's get to the actual kind of topic now that we've set it up. So I think, given this, a big thing that people often overlook within mental illness is the role of guilt and shame. Now, people would, I think external people who don't have the same subjective experience of mental illness don't understand this. I don't mean that as like an insult or to be condescending. I'm just saying I think it's like trying to describe a flavor somebody's never had. Like if someone's never had a berry before, it's trying to describe what a strawberry tastes like. It's very challenging. So there is a lot of shame and guilt involved in this. And I think this fundamentally comes from, like I said, the contradiction, the conflict between the conscious mind and the emotional mind. Because the conscious mind, I think, is a lot more in line with, I guess you'd say, traditional morality, societal expectations. I guess you could say, like, rational economic, practical concerns, that sort of thing. It tends to, in my view, be less selfish oftentimes than kind of more your emotions, and more kind of far-sighted and more able to see the big picture. So what happens is these two things are completely disaligned, and because they're disaligned, the objective kind of consciousness is seeing the world through this super depressive, frankly delusional framework. So kind of like I said, the rational conscious part of your brain is receiving all this just bad data, all this bad information. It's like you go into Excel and you just type a bunch of random numbers in, and you try to get a result out of it. So your consciousness is getting all this bad information, and it's basing its kind of judgments of the world and of yourself on it. So let's just, maybe it's easier to just go through some examples. So a lot of people who have depression, let's just maybe go through some ways that people are depressed. You're depressed because you love your family. Even if you kind of have messed up feelings and you're angry at them periodically, most people love their family consciously as well as, I guess you could say, subjectively. So they objectively and subjectively love their families. And they have the basic, I guess you could say, social biological desire to help their family members out, to not cause undue harm or suffering to them. And what most people do, particularly when you're younger or you're married or you have kids, is you develop a severe sense of guilt regarding your mental illness because it's a burden you're putting on them. Because you're having to talk to your mother and going, "Hey mom, I've started cutting my wrists. Doesn't that look cool? Maybe we should do something about it." Or you're just like, "Well, I think I'm worthless." Maybe you are having trouble like getting a job because of severe social anxiety. Maybe you can't like pick your sister up, I guess, after her soccer practices or something, just because you have trouble driving because of your illness. I don't know. My point is there's all this emotional and practical burdens you put on your family that are very painful. You feel a lot of guilt. Your mother might be having a hard day from work, and you go to her and you go, "Look, I'm feeling suicidal. I can't take it." And you're having to put all that stress and that burden onto her or onto your whoever, your significant person you care about in your life. And that feels terrible. It feels absolutely horrendous. And this is coming at a time when you, as the depressed person, have very low self-esteem to begin with. You already have this extremely negative view of yourself. And now you're basically, what would be the term, actualizing you're giving credence to this extremely negative self view. So because you're going, well, I have this, I'm a terrible person, and here's a good example of me being a terrible person. It's imposing this burden on them, and that kind of spreads outwards. Sometimes you might just be say to your friends, look, I don't really want to go out for dinner, or for a movie, or for lunch or something, because it's just too much for you. You're emotionally exhausted, etc. And the person in question might really like you, and they might want you to come, and you can see that like disappointment in their eyes. And it's very painful, and this builds up over time, and as it builds up and builds up and builds up, it contributes to an extremely negative self-image within a person who already has a negative self-image. And it also makes them hypercritical, so they kind of come to view any negative reaction with another person as, I guess, just searching for the word, a verification of the fact that they're a terrible person. So like if they kind of snap at somebody, if they make their parents sad because they're worrying about them, etc., all this stuff contributes to this negative self-image and this constant guilt, this belief that you're not adequate, etc., and it leads you to kind of isolate yourself. So that's kind of, I think, the very basic level as to how guilt and shame is affected in it. You have an illness that makes you hypercritical of yourself, that can negatively impact your ability to interact with others, and that kind of makes these negative interpersonal conflicts more likely than they would be for a normal person. So it kind of gets there, and then it kind of spirals outward. And why I'm talking about this is because this is, I think, with me and for a lot of people with depression, particularly people with depression who have higher functioning depression. Now, there's high and low functioning. There's like low functioning where you're basically in a coma. You're so depressed you can't move. And there's people with high functioning depression like myself who don't really seem, they might seem a little gloomy or a little blue or a little kind of reserved, but they can hold down a job, they can like cook, clean for themselves, they may be very successful. It's they can, they're self-sufficient, they just have depression. Like in my case, I have high functioning severe depression, which is kind of unusual because most high functioning depression, to my understanding, is like mild to moderate. But in my case, it's severe. But that's kind of another topic for another time. So people with high functioning depression, I think, are more aware of, like I said, that objective kind of conscious thing that wants to live up to social norms, that wants to be good, that wants to do the right thing. You're more aware of where you fall short. And it's very difficult, and this comes from, because there's people with high, I'm sorry if I'm jumping around, but there's a lot of stuff to bite into on this. There's people I know who just don't care about what anyone thinks. They might have a strange hobby. They might I don't know, they might spend 20 hours a week building model trains. And if somebody comes up to them and they're like, look, that's a dumb hobby, you should be doing something else with their time, they just tell them to, like, piss off. I don't care, I'm happy with my trains. And they'll be perfectly happy doing that. And people attacking them or criticizing them won't have any impact on it. Maybe they dress a specific way. Maybe they've made the decision to have like 5 kids and they're poor, but they're happy. Maybe they've made the decision to not have kids and they're happy with that. There are those people who are able to kind of make a decision and keep to it. But then there's the depressed person, the person with a mental illness, where they aren't really able to accept who and what they are. They aren't able to accept their gifts, their failings, their achievements, etc. and they aren't able to just be at peace with who they are. And like I said earlier, it comes from this fundamental divide, or this stress between your emotions and your consciousness. And you can't be at peace with who you are. So what people often tend to do in these situations is they idealize the people around them. Now, this may be someone who hates the people around them. It may even be someone who does something like a mass shooting, but at the same time, they acknowledge a certain superiority in them as being people who aren't messed up in the same way, who are happier, who are more able to function. And there is kind of a certain innate jealousy and idealization of them. They may also just, because they don't know how to think or feel themselves, they will take on kind of the generic ideal of society, or what they think the normal person should be. That's something I'm very much guilty of. That's not that doesn't mean it's wrong. I think what you have to understand is, when I say maybe, certain mental illnesses gear people towards certain politics or certain ideas, that doesn't mean the idea itself is wrong. And that would be, I guess, the genetic fallacy. It just means that is a contributing factor along with the other stuff. I mean, an idea has to be defeated on its own merits or accepted on its own merits, but that is definitely something that predisposes people to go in a certain direction. So like I'm saying, people who are higher function, they see the people around them, they see the broader society, and they kind of take all that stuff together, their religion, social norms, and they kind of come up with a list of stuff that they should be doing. And as would frankly happen, and I can say this because I'm doing this as an objective video, emotionally I don't really believe any of this. It's hopefully that kind of makes sense, but they will come up with this person that they should be, that maybe parts of it might be attainable, maybe parts of it might be who they are, but overall it's a contrivance. It's, as I've said in the past, it's, first off, you're assuming the people around you and the people you're idolizing are a lot less messed up than they really are, that they're a lot more competent than they really are. Also, you're assuming that kind of the ideal, or what society values, is something attainable. I mean, to a certain extent, the idea, like the whole like 1950s Stepford Wives, that kind of thing, was society ever really like that, or is that kind of something that we want to strive towards? And like I said, it's you aren't capable of being comfortable or really viewing things objectively. So what tends to happen is you get this idea in your head, or you see something, you just go crazy with it, and you go, "Am I like that? Am I living up to that image?" And frankly, normal people can't live up to the image you normally form. Normal people are messed up. So what winds up happening is you'll have this image, and I think media has made this a lot worse, by the way, because it gives you this perception that people can do everything. Like, you'll have someone who's like a weightlifter and an intellectual, and he has a bunch of women, and he's successful in his career. I guess there's a small, tiny minority of people like that. But for most people, they can only have a certain number of talents or a certain number of areas of focuses. Maybe they just hate physical activity and they like reading. Maybe they don't like reading, or they don't like intellectual pursuits, and they like, I don't know, just doing art or something. I mean, people just naturally aren't generalists. They don't have the ability to do everything, nor do they really have the obligation to do everything. But to someone who's severely depressed and has a negative self-image and has a much higher opinion of others, you feel like they are achieving all this stuff. That they played football and they got better grades than you, and they had more luck with women than you, etc., etc. So you're competing against this idealized image that doesn't actually exist and doesn't really reflect anyone in reality. And this is the attempt of your conscious mind, I guess, to try to perceive the world, like I said, through a very corrupt focusing lens. It's like trying to fire a laser through a cracked lens. It's not going to work very well. Or it's like trying to record something with a cracked lens. It's not going to work really well. Your consciousness, your reason is deeply just twisted by the feelings within you, and it gives you this delusional picture of the world. So kind of hopefully people kind of realize I'm describing myself to a large extent, because people sometimes get the impression that I'm very prideful, or I think I'm smarter or know better than everybody. That's not really the truth. I mean, I have a lot of doubts about everything. I try to be real with that, but kind of getting into it. So what kind of happens, and maybe it's a good point to go into my experience, particularly what I'm having lately, is when you find that you just fundamentally can't do things, or you just don't have certain desires, or you can't conform to this image you have, and you can't achieve certain things. And the fact that you can't do that, and you can't pursue what you think would be the good life, pursue your obligations, etc., is an immense, like I said, stress, to the point where people will kill themselves over it. Like, maybe all you can manage with your level of emotional strength is just to work for a living. Working like kind of an unskilled, or I guess a semi-skilled job, not really having a family or anything, just living a quiet life, and maybe a bachelor apartment, etc. Maybe that's all you can reasonably do and remain stable. And really, there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that, because I know in our circles we like to talk about like conformity. You need to do this, you need to lift, you need to learn a trade, you need to have the family, everything. You can't do everything, and trying to pressure people and tell them they should be doing everything just makes them depressed and discourages them from doing what they can do. So I'm just saying, like, some people just don't have the capacity to do anything more than that, and they shouldn't really be hounded for it and like insulted. I mean, there's nothing wrong with trying to encourage people to do new things, or to go out, but to try to guilt somebody for something they're just incapable of. And I do say can't, because in a lot of cases it isn't, won't. In a lot of cases, getting someone with a specific mental illness to do something is like getting a paraplegic to like do jumping jacks. It's something they're mentally and physically incapable of doing. So like I said, so you see all this stuff around you that you want to partake in, but you just can't, or it's just not in your nature. And so you feel guilty about it. So like you feel guilty that you're not more sociable. You feel guilty you don't have more friends. You feel guilty you don't have children, that you're not married, that you're not more ambitious in your career, etc., etc. And you feel this guilt, and it doesn't help. There's these expectations. And I'm not saying expectations aren't good for society. I'm not saying everyone should just be a needer. I'm just saying there is often this and the media's push it, this unrealistic expectations that everybody can live up to this Hollywood average, I guess is a good term to call it. Where it is average, it's not really extraordinary, but it's being good at everything, which just not everybody is. So hopefully I'm kind of making sense. So just going to my life and kind of some causes of that. I hate competition. I really hate it, to the point where I just never wanted to play team sports as a kid. Not even because the physical requirements of it, but it's something that just really makes me angry, makes me stressed. I don't like to directly compete with people. And to this day, I don't like to play versus matches and online games, or do things competitively. I just really hate it. And the fact that I fundamentally hate it and I can't really take part in that caused a lot of stress because I whenever I tried sports, I get really angry. I'd cry. I swear. I would just break down, and it wasn't from lack of trying. I tried it very often as a kid, and eventually my parents just gave up because it was just too emotionally destructive for me. Um, I would just dread going to it, and when I was there, I wouldn't have any enjoyment from it. And I felt guilty about that because I saw all these other kids and they were just able to go play, have fun, hit the ball around, that kind of thing. And I couldn't do that. And I felt guilty and I was like, you're a terrible person. You're this twisted shell of a person. You're evil. You know how it is. And that's just kind of like that. I guess I didn't have more friends as a kid just because I get I've gotten a lot better over time, but I just get very emotionally exhausted being around people. Particularly, at least it used to be in kind of intimate, I guess you could say more emotionally intimate settings. Also, just a severe fear in approaching people or breaking the ice with them or getting to know them. Um, and that when everyone else was kind of spending their summers hanging out with friends and stuff, and I would spend time with friends, but for the most part I would just spend most of my time alone or with family. I would feel guilty about that, and what would make me feel more guilty is a lot of the time I wouldn't really feel lonely. Maybe that sounds really weird, but I kind of felt like if I felt lonely in the situation, then that would mean I was more normal. It would mean I was a loser, but it would mean I was a normal loser. I don't know if that makes any sense, but like that's better than just being this this evil creature that just doesn't have socially acceptable good standards. That kind of thing. So I didn't really have that many friends, nor did I really have a desire for them. Because fundamentally, like once again, I've gotten better at this. I just despised people. I hated them. I didn't want to be around them, etc. And the schism between that feeling and what I intellectually knew I should be doing was extremely stressful, an extremely difficult experience to go through. I don't really talk about sexuality much on this just because it's something I'm very uncomfortable with. But I don't think it would surprise anyone to say I've never been in a relationship. I've never really been interested in anyone that way. I'm heterosexual, certainly, and I do experience sexual attraction, but only in kind of an abstract sense. I've never really felt that way towards anyone that I like wanted to be in a relationship. I like romance a lot. I like it because it's the ideal. I like reading romance stories. It's just not something that I've ever personally felt, nor do I know if I really could personally feel. Because, like, I remember when I was younger, the thought of sex was just so disgusting to me. I just couldn't eat. I hated to think about it. I hated to talk about it. Um, I just, it really disgusted me. And to a certain extent, it still does, to the point where like I said, I'm in my mid 20s. I've never had a relationship. I've never approached a girl. And I guess to my mind, the fact that this doesn't bother me makes it worse. Because once again, it's like you can be just kind of a loser who's had no luck or isn't capable of doing it, or you're somebody who's just a freak, a weirdo, is deranged, and there is a lot of tension between, I guess, kind of the ideals I espouse and my personal failures, be it my often social isolation, my over reliance on stuff like video games to unwind after work, my lack of active involvement in my church, my inability, my not inability to network or have relationships with women and all that kind of stuff. And I know that a lot of that, how I live my life personally, goes against kind of what I espouse. But in my defense, I don't really defend the way I am or the way I live my life. And maybe that's a bad thing. Maybe I should just change my views to be in line with what I do personally. But it's like I said, that is the tension there. Is I know for certain intellectually and morally that the nuclear family is a good thing, but emotionally I just am terrified and horrified and just don't feel a desire to do that and to have that myself. I just don't, and there's a, like I said, a great stress between those two. Because on one hand, I feel obligated to promote something that I believe is objectively good for other people, but that I don't know if I could ever share in myself, just because I'm weird and different and stuff. And like that with, I guess, religion is another one where I do personally completely do believe in God's existence and Jesus Christ and what the Catholic Church teaches. At the same time, I'm completely emotionally dead with regards to my faith. I don't feel God's presence. I haven't for a very long amount of time. It's just something I know to be true, and I know to be a good thing, and I know that it helps a lot of other people emotionally. And so I kind of promote and proselytize, despite the fact that I personally find it almost impossible to pray. I haven't been able to for a very long time. It's something I have to absolutely force myself to do. I don't find it very pleasant. But like I said, I feel guilty about that. I feel guilty about that, and I feel guilty about both promoting ideas that I personally failed to kind of embody myself, and also guilt that I don't necessarily feel bad about it. It's kind of funny because it's worse. It's worse the fact that it doesn't, that I don't necessarily feel bad about it. Sorry, this is all very difficult to explain and to kind of understand. Like, to a certain extent, what are some other things? Career goals. People seem to have like these really lofty career goals. Like, I want to start my own company. I want to be an executive. I want upper management. I want to be wealthy, etc. And personally, in that regard, I guess I've just never been that ambitious a person. I'd like to make a good salary for a nice middle to upper middle class living. I'm not particularly expensive. I'd like to be able to save and invest lots of money and that kind of thing, but I don't really have any of these kind of grand desires to own like a huge house and fancy cars and that kind of thing and to be the top of my industry. I just be happy for a decent paying job with benefits that is in a, I don't know, just kind of a pleasant job. I just don't really have a desire for like a super existence. And I kind of feel guilty that I'm not more ambitious. And maybe that's just kind of a thing in our society that you're forced to be more ambitious. You're forced to try to bite off more than you can chew. So that's just, I guess, kind of my confession, and that's something I've really been going through a lot of pain with lately, is, I don't know, like getting older, I guess. I do actually have friends, and I do have IRL friends, I do have a lot of online friends I do talk to every day. I just don't have a social network in the way a lot of people do, that I can just call up and just on a whim. I don't have that. Like I said, I do work for a living. I do work like 50 hours a week, plus I commute like 3 hours a day. So like frankly, I'm just kind of too tired when I get home to do anything other than just play video games and go to bed. And then I'll do like other stuff on the weekend, but I just don't really have the energy for hobbies or clubs or any of that kind of thing. And I feel really guilty about that. Like I should be more engaged. Like I should be doing something else with my life. And like I said, the guilt regarding that is immense. And I understand it for probably most people, that's how they live their lives. There's this false impression that everyone's like having fun all the time, but most people probably spend most of their time just going to work, going home, making themselves some food, watching TV, going to bed, going back to work. That's just kind of the culture. So, like I said, when I say all these things and I say that I feel severe guilt to the point of suicide about them, I'm not saying that my feelings are obviously mostly irrational. They're mostly just kind of like gross exaggerations of reality. But that contributes to a very negative self image. And a negative self image makes it harder for you to do anything to change the underlying factors that cause the negative self. It's just a vicious feedback loop. It's a vicious cycle. So I guess what I'm saying is there is the guilt and there is the sorrow that you're not normal. And we can have all these jokes about neurotypicals, about normies, all that kind of thing. But ultimately, I do think there's a lot of envy within it. There's people who use their mental illness and they kind of own it and they say, I'm bipolar, but being bipolar has made me do blank. It's made me more aware of people's feelings. It's made me more compassionate. It's made me more scholarly. And that's good. You should have that, and you should try to look at the bright side of it, and you should try to own it. But then there's people who go a step further and say, like, I'm superior because of it, and I wouldn't cure it if I could. I think that's also very unhealthy. But ultimately, I think there's a lot of jealousy towards being normal. And I think most people like me, if they were honest with themselves, would give anything to be normal, to not have like psychotically dark thoughts, to not want to kill yourself 24/7, to just have a normal life. Even if there might be extraordinary or kind of interesting things about your current issues, I think that pales in comparison to just being normal. So I hope that video made sense. I'm sorry it was super long and rambling, but these are difficult topics to deal with under the best of times. So I'll talk to you guys later.